Hi everyone, welcome to this class. So we're going to paint this landscape and I'm going to use Mule the collection watercolor paper. This is 140 pounds cold press. This is my favorite watercolor paper. I choose this paper for a couple of reasons. One of the main reasons is because I can easily add layers, no issues. So I don't lift the previous layers when I try to add that next, second, or third layer. And another thing is it's a plant-based paper, so no smell to it. And another thing is that if I do want to lift some colors, actually I can do that. So those are just a couple of the qualities, what I love about this watercolor paper. So this is the landscape that we're going to paint. A sketch is available on Patreon. So if you need a sketch and to download like a list of art supplies, then you can always find it there. This sketch is very rough. It's light because it's just a landscape, and whenever I paint a landscape or a seascape, I don't need much to it. Overall, like when you look at the reference, the sky is much smaller, and I decided to make my sky way larger so I have more room to play with colors. And then the meadow is a little smaller. This is 9 by 12. I think something like this can be easily painted on 16 by 20, so you have like even more room to play with the colors. So I'm going to strategize this in a way. I'm going to wet the entire paper, and I'm going to wet it for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to start applying colors wet on wet, starting from the top, so where I have the sky, and I'm going to start with bluish tones. So for that I'm going to use phthalo blue, but I'm going to change the shade of that blue by adding a little bit of red. And then as we look at the sky, it becomes orange, yellow. That's when I want to use primary yellow, mixed a little bit with quin red, but also with an addition of another yellow. This is ISO yellow deep. Those are Holbein watercolors. And then that's pretty much it for the sky, but I'm going to keep moving down where I have the meadow. That's where I'm going to use more of the imidazolone yellow, some of the ISO yellow. I'll add some of the red again. And then for the darkest tones, also wherever I can see some green, I'm going to add green. And then I'll blend slightly on the palette, but mix colors on the paper. So sap green, Van Dyke brown, indigo. I'm going to use some of the burnt sienna for the village here. So where we have like this passage here with the some trees in the background. That's later. First layer is just to cover like the sky, the meadow. Once this dries, that's when I'm going to start working on the tree here, wet on dry. And then I'm going to work on this part here where we have the village and some houses. Now, I did use some of the masking fluid. This masking fluid is by Schminke. It's a blue bottle, water-based. So I just used it, and this is all dry. The next step is to have your colors squeeze onto your palettes and then dilute them with water to a consistency that I like to call heavy cream-like ratio between water and paint. So I'm going to show you what my palette looks like, and I'm going to dilute these colors with water. So this is imidazolone yellow, ISO yellow, sap green, Van Dyke brown, burnt sienna, leftovers, quin red, phthalo blue, and indigo. Step 1 is to wet the paper. Now, if you need more time to apply the colors wet on wet, I suggest to remove the sheet from a block or a pad and then flip it over, wet the back side of the paper first, and then flip it back and start wetting the front side. You would wet the back side for about 2 minutes, and then you would wet the front side for about 3 minutes. And this is flat 40 size brush, Da Vinci's Casanel. And I'm just going to wet it. I already have masking. I don't have to worry about the houses there. And I can go over like whatever I'm going to have, the plants and so on. So let's just wet it for a couple of minutes. So one of the clues I get that the paper is ready for me is that the sheet slightly starts to buckle, just tiny bit. And that's when I know, okay, I applied quite a bit of water there. Now I don't want any puddles of water, so I'm just kind of pushing the water over the edges. And I'm going to actually grab a smaller brush. This is the same type of a brush, but it's a size 24. So it's a flat brush. That one was more like a wash, but this is a flat brush, and this is Da Vinci's Casanel. And I'm kind of slightly wiping it on a towel, just touching it. So what I need is some of the phthalo blue. So I have a little too much water. So I'm, again, touching the towel first. And there's my quin red. What you want to do is mix colors on the paper versus your palette. So it's a quick blend. Now, where do I see those blues? on the top, mostly on the top, and I want to change the shade of that blue violet basically. So now I grabbed a little more of the quinacridone red. So there you go. Now the paper feels pretty wet. It feels almost like too wet a little bit. So I might have to go through it a couple of times. So I'm just touching my towel just to remove some of that excessive water. So there's my phthalo blue, and I want a little more. And what helps is to actually adjusting the ratio between water and paint. So now I'm trying to grab a little thicker amount of that phthalo blue. Now I do see a little bit of that, let's say like a cobalt blue, like a blue and red somewhere here as well. So I'm just adding it here. And again, I need to wipe my brush on a towel slightly, just so I can pull this so I don't have a bloom, because I did have a little too much water to begin with. So I'm going through it, because once I walk away from this area, this will start drying and I won't be able to go back there without like disturbing the paint. What I need to do is create like a transition between the colors. So that's when we start seeing more of the red, but also some of the yellow. So there's my quin red. So there's my quin red here. So more of that with more like a quin red, still with a phthalo blue. And then try to add it right underneath this. And then we're leaving a little space actually for the sun, if I haven't mentioned it, what I'm going to do about the sun situation. So somewhere there, what I'm going to do is clean my brush quickly, wipe it on a towel, and that's when I'm going to start grabbing the, this is my imidazzle yellow, some of the iso yellow, and there's my quin red. I'm going to make it really nice and warm, this area overall. And this is where I'm going to have that sun area, but I'm going to stay away. I'm not creating like a perfect sun shape. Instead, I'm just going to show that there's like sun glowing through that, from that area. So that's all I want. And then if I want it to be more orange-like, I just need to add more of that quinacridone red. More of the iso yellow and some of that quin red. And you need to adjust the ratio between water and paint. So to me, it feels more like a heavy cream-like ratio between water and paint. You can go a little slightly higher too, just to create like a nice transition between colors. And the way I pull the paint, apply the colors, it's really quick actually, and I try not to overwork these areas and have like a more like a very quick kind of stroke going through instead of like stopping and thinking about it. So a little more of the red with it. And just to add it here, now I don't need much color, like right here where I have this horizon line. But I'm gonna go right above the housing in the village, this whole village, and I can go through these areas as long as this is still wet. I'm gonna grab this same colors, plus a little more of the red. So you're changing the shade of that orange, yellow, when you are adjusting like the ratios or grabbing each time, like, okay, this time you grab a little more of the red, this time you grab a little more of the yellow. And you can continue going through these areas as long as this is all shiny, still feels wet, and you can go through and kind of smooth it. What it feels like, it's like the brush is almost damp. And then I can just go through. But I have to hurry up because the bottom part is starting to really dry out. So I'm going to grab just a little bit of water, a little more water. I don't want this to be like a heavy cream because then I'm just going to remove the water from the paper. But I do have to have more like a half and half, I'd say, just so I don't have too much water. If I have too much water, that will push the paint upwards. So I just had to readjust it a little bit. The ratio between water and paint. I want this to be really nice and yellow. So I'm grabbing now more like this half and half like ratio. I'm referring to dairy. More of that yellow. But I also want to start adding some of the iso yellow. And I need more imidazzle yellow. In a little water here. There we go. But I want to have different shades of that yellow. So now I'm starting to mixing in some of this iso yellow. I can go back to the same areas. If I go back here, I have to adjust the ratio again because this area is drying, and if I have too much water again, I'm gonna create a bloom, and that will push the paint upwards, and the bloom will be like right here. So go for these areas and just apply the colors, the two basically. You're actually re-wetting the paper too this time, like this way. A little more of the two. I want this to be nice and vibrant. Now I want to add some red to it too. Just like we have in the sky, we were adding some of this red. I'm going to add it like right here. When you go through with strokes like this, you're also creating like some path in there. It doesn't have to be right away with the darks. You can actually build it up slowly. So let's say at first you're just adding yellows, then the other yellow, iso yellow, right? And then you start adding some of the reds, and then you start adding like the sap green, for example. I'm gonna pull all these colors together and then add it here. And again, this is the area where I'm gonna add some of the greens. Now, I want some of the red actually with the green, and I'm gonna place it right where I kind of sketched it for myself, where I'm gonna have this kind of passage here. This is like a little trail, I'd say, almost. And then you can dab slightly with the brush too on some of these areas, just to create some texture, very gently. And I want to keep working on this part. So actually I have some of the burnt sienna that's mixing in here. Doesn't bother me. I'm gonna grab now some of the sap green, and I had a little chunk of paint. So as long as you keep going and keep moving it around, if you have like a chunk, you'll be fine. You just don't want like chunk of the paint to actually dry somewhere like where you have like a nice transparent layer, because it won't just look pretty. But here, to create that texture, there's different ways. First of all, we want to work on the contrast, right? Light and shadows. So we're purposely adding more color, more darks here. And this is when I could start adding some of this Van Dyke brown. This is more like a heavy cream-like ratio between water and paint. I right away like knew that when I was painting or started painting it, that I need to keep the bottom much darker. This is actually something that can be done again with a round brush. For example, I just grabbed a little bit of indigo. There's some of the indigo to make it even darker. And then I'll kind of create like some more patches here and there. This is that path. So we would have like some shadows in between here. But I need way more of that green to show there's some green. And another thing what we can do is splatter some paint, basically. We can just splatter some paint. So as long as this is wet, you can continue adding colors, wet on wet. But I suggest to keep an eye on like how wet the paper is, because maybe you need to adjust that ratio between water and paint. Right now it feels like I have more like a heavy cream like ratio between water and paint. So something like this. Just something, right? Just to show that there's something in this field, the meadow. Doesn't have to be exactly like those flowers, exactly. This can be like, it's just drops of paint, basically. Splatter of paint. Nothing has to be detailed. And I feel like it's time for me to clean my brush. So I'm going to clean this flat brush. Clean it well, so you have it ready to go for whatever else you need to do. And then I'm going to grab my, let's see, I'm actually going to grab my rigger brush. I'm going to show you what you can do with a rigger brush. Now this is my rigger size 2 Songbird. What I'm going to do is first of all grab some of the yellows. So this is Imidazzalong yellow and some of the Iso yellow. And then I'm just going to add some of this paint towards the wet areas, but this is cream top like ratio. So think of like heavier ratio, so heavier paint, like a thicker paint. And what would really look nice and what works great is actually if you splatter opaque watercolor. So opaque watercolor, and you want to splatter like somewhere here where you have these flowers, like kind of like they stand out more, like you can tell like these are flowers, so you want to define them better. So you want to change the ratios between colors, you want to use different colors, but you can also use opaque watercolor, which really works in a case like this. So different yellow, and Holbein actually has a lot of opaque colors, just FYI. There you go. And you want to keep an eye, because like on the paper, because you don't want to like add it towards areas that are like lost the shine, basically, too dry. And here I kept this area lighter, like above the horizon line. So this is also being pulled a little bit because the paint and water is kind of going this way. So I just have to keep an eye on it. And in case I have a bloom, that can be fixed with a second layer. So for now, I think I'm going to grab a little more of this. With a dirty brush, I'm grabbing some of this sap green. And it's like I'm painting with just the tip of my brush. It's just to add some spots, right? Nothing has to be perfect. Nothing has to be recreated in a perfect way here. This is a landscape. I want to keep it loose. And you want to find a couple areas that are still feel damp, like still wet. The paper is still slightly wet. Doesn't have to be like exactly the same areas again. You can choose areas where you want to add this kind of greenish tone, which I'd say I also have some of the red in it. So quinacridone red too. And then if you mix some of the indigo in, you can go back here where we have this shadowed area, the path. And with the indigo I already have, or sap green I have, and quin red on my brush, it becomes even darker. Like you don't need to use like the exact shade that you see in the reference, for example. Let's say like you see something black, you don't have to use black. You can just create your own black, what I mean. So I'm dabbing on it a little more. If I pull the paint like this, it's kind of like creating almost like grass strokes. So you can do that too if you want to. So I'm going to leave it. This is ready to just kind of leave it, let it dry. And then when we come back, we can paint some of that foliage. So the next step would be to paint this foliage on top coming from the tree. So let's say the tree trunk is on the right side. And here when we add some foliage, first of all, we're going to start with a yellow undertone. So like an imidazolone yellow, we can kind of slightly mix it with iso yellow, or we can wait to add iso yellow later. So let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab my long quill, size 2 brush. And I want to have like a water-like ratio. So ratio between water and paint feels like watery, kind of. And more water. What I'm going to do is paint this wet on dry. And this is, I have some sketch lines, but I'm just going to, I guess, start here. So these leaves that go over like the area where the sun is glowing, you would have more of that yellow. And we slowly build it up. We are going to add some green too. I'm just grabbing some more of the yellow. Basically, it's like a quick add-on, and you're creating these leaves using a brush. And I suggest to have like a softer brush. It's really quick. I'm not going to try to do too much here. I just want some yellow for the green leaves. Maybe one will be like this. And then I'm going to grab some of this thicker now. I'm out of this iso yellow. It's a little thicker. That's because at this point, this is becoming more like a wet on wet. Because I already added these leaves there. I painted those leaves. Those were wet on dry. However, when I'm applying more color towards those leaves, they're still wet. Or at least partially wet. So that's kind of like why it's the ratio changed. There you go, something like this. I'm going to clean this brush. You want to keep this transparent, by the way. And this is my sap green. I'm trying to grab like a, let's say, half and half like ratio between water and paint, but you know, I have a quill. It's kind of harder to grab that ratio. It's okay. It's more like a between milk and half and half like ratio. You want it to be like a clean green, and you could actually slightly mix it with a yellow as well. However, we're letting these colors to blend together. On the paper, we're adding the green anyway. So whatever you want to show that there's some of this green in there. So that's where we can add some of this sap green. So choose some areas. You don't want it to be too busy. And something like shadows can be added later. There you go. Maybe here I want to keep this a little more yellowish overall because I have the sun here, and kind of like it. I guess it's just a matter of a composition, something like this. I'm gonna clean my brush, and now with that damp brush, I mean, still wet brush, it's kind of like damp. I'm trying to grab some of this burnt sienna just to add an additional shade to this, and see how it all blends. There you go, maybe over here. So there's my foliage. Now, another thing I want to do, and I do need more of the burnt sienna here, so I'm going to squeeze this more and thicker paint. What I need is my rigger brush. This is my rigger 2 Songbird. I'm going to grab burnt sienna, like a heavy cream-like ratio, and some of this diluted Van Dyke brown. Now, before this is too dry, I need more paint. You want to go through, again, this is like a cream, I'd say cream top-like ratio is better. You want the two colors together, colors to separate on the paper. And you're dragging through, like you're connecting the pieces in the way. So whatever you want to show more of the burnt sienna, then you just want to have more of that burnt sienna in that brush. But I want to show there's Van Dyke brown too. And then if I want to dilute this more with water, I can kind of go on the outside a little bit. So something like that, just to have like a couple branches like sticking out. Something like this. Maybe, let's see over here a little bit. I think that's plenty. However, to make it a little prettier, I'm gonna add like a couple leaves right there. So I grabbed Imidazzle yellow, and then I grabbed some of this Van Dyke, I'm sorry, Iso yellow, Imidazzle yellow, and then some of the sap green. There you go. So now I have more of that foliage in there. Now I'm gonna clean the brushes. What's the next step? We still have to paint this above the horizon, the line of all that foliage there. For this, I'm going to use my round 8 golden wand brush, and I'm gonna do this wet on wet, or actually wet on dry, wet on dry. This is my burnt sienna. So because I'm gonna do this wet on dry, I'm gonna have quite a bit of water mixed in with that paint. Feels more like a water-like ratio. And you want to stay like above that line. I kind of went down. So you press a little harder, and then you release that paint. You're gonna go through these buildings because the buildings are, some parts are covered in that masking. So when you look at the reference, it's like some of these parts are much lower. There you go. We're gonna add more color to it, but we want to do it fairly fast. There you go. And then we're gonna grab some of the Van Dyke brown on top of that burnt sienna Van Dyke brown. This is more like a heavy cream-like ratio between water and paint. And some sap green. Let's grab some sap green. Now we gotta go fast through this because this is drying. So I'm grabbing some sap green, some Van Dyke brown. I went a little too low here. There you go. And then looking at the reference, it's like some parts on the top are darker, like on the bottom. You want to feel it out. What I want to do is grab more of that Van Dyke brown and burnt sienna and go back here, left side, and actually grab a tiny bit of indigo too. And then go on top a little bit. So when you slightly touch it, you're gonna start recreating like some of this foliage too. And you can use the tip of your brush to create some of the trees. But for this, I'm going to clean my brush and grab more like a burnt sienna with Iso yellow and Imidazzle yellow. And then slightly like touch with the tip of your brush whatever you want to have some of the trees. There you go. Slightly going like above, and maybe you want some tree here or there. And Perfect. Now, you can also, for those trees, you can grab some of the Van Dyke brown and add more to it, just to have these colors mix more like on the paper. So you have different shades. I'm gonna clean the brush. The painting is almost done. We just have to wait for this to dry so we can remove the masking fluid. Another thing is that if we want to add another layer here to make it more vibrant, we can do it, but let's just wait for this part to dry first. Hi everyone, welcome back. So everything is dry and now I'm going to remove masking fluid. And now it would be nice to add a little bit of a color and shade it a bit. So I have my round 2. This is Da Vinci Cosmotop. And I have here just like a water-like ratio. So the ratio between water and paint. Slightly adding it towards the left side, just to have some color there. And then with that same brush, I didn't clean it. I grabbed some of the Van Dyke brown and burnt sienna. And I'm gonna also find a couple darker areas where I wanna make it darker on the left side. And this is more of the paint. And ideally you wanna add it before this is dry, what you added just a second ago. But that's all I want. I just want some shapes in the background. Next thing, if you want to, you can add some birds in the background in the sky. And you can also add second layer here for the meadow. The way I would add that second layer for the meadow is I would re-wet after here, this horizon line, re-wet it, and then apply the colors in the same areas, wet on wet. However, I would stay away from the top part of the meadow and mostly focus on adding colors here in the foreground. I also had some masking fluid here and I removed it. So that would get colored if you were re-wetting this again. But you would stay away from like these areas, for example, if you wanted to keep them lighter. So I'm gonna remove masking tape. And thank you so much for taking this class with me.